So you've been eyeing the TP9 for a while, and then you saw the USW P320 module and the G17 chassis, and you thought to yourself, can this scratch the same itch? But is slapping a chassis onto your pistol really the same as owning the real deal? Or are you just trying to spruce up a Corolla into a sports car? Well, the good news is that I have all three, and I was once in the same boat. So now you don't have to be the smartest man on earth to decide whether to pony up TP9 money or just get that G17 Glock chassis for the Glock that you never shoot. I'm going to break down the pros and the cons of all three in case you're not sure about which one is right for you. Objectively, B&T makes some of the most beautiful guns that money can buy. And with that high quality comes a comparably high price tag. The TP9 is just one of many subguns from B&T, and it is no exception to this rule. And as you would get with any gun today, if you look hard enough on the internet, you're probably going to find some hate. And you know what they say, you can't win them all. But if you look into the narrative online about the TP9, you will see that it seems to garner a lot more negative attention than almost any other B&T platform, possibly rivaled by the SBC9, but I'm almost certain that 90% of those bad comments came from one salty SBC9 hater who has since deleted his Reddit account. But I digress. The TP9 gets a lot of hate, and I mean a lot. Whether it's in a deal section, people hating on it, calling it an overpriced Glock, or on a YouTube video, I'm not going to name names, where people are shooting it with a sling and no grip and then hating on it. The TP9 gets hate for the trigger, for the use of the polymer, for the price compared to a simple blowback operated handgun, to the lack of threaded barrel, to the fact it uses proprietary suppressors, to the mount that suppressor even uses, to name a few. Oh my God. People call it cheap, overpriced. They refer to it as the Swiss Kel-Tec. And although I love Kel-Tec and I think they have great innovation in their products, comparing the TP9 build quality to a sub 2000 is really something only a non-TP9 owner would say, let alone someone who's ever even held one or read any of the statistics on the platform. And I can get where the Americans are coming from because you guys get pistols, and that's kind of like a cucked version of what the actual gun should be like. But in Canada, we get the real deal. It's the SBR with the grip and the stock, and that thing fucks. You've heard all the TP9 hate, and you're just wondering, is it worth it? And I'm going to settle it once and for all. Okay, here's a brief rundown of the TP9 for anyone that's not privy to the gun. The TP9 is an extremely lightweight compact submachine gun that operates using a rotating locking bolt. It has a 5.1-inch barrel and weighs just 3.1 pounds. It uses a proprietary suppressor design and feeds B&T's proprietary magazines, which were originally a Strayer TMP magazine. The charge handle is in the rear, kind of like an AR-style charge handle, and depending on what model you have, the safety is either going to be an HK-style safety or a cross-block-style safety. I'm just going to run down some pros and cons. First, the pros. The actual controls. It has dedicated controls. They're not covered by anything. They're not the best, but they're there. Then we have takedown. The takedown is easy. It doesn't require any tools or toothpicks or wives or girlfriends. You can just do it by yourself, like most guns. Fullish top rail and a side rail to mount lights and lasers. You don't have a full top rail. The front iron kind of interferes with mounting some things, and I have literally seen people chop it off, which is kind of horrific. But anyway, it's there. The full stock with a really nice, great butt stock. This thing is comfortable. It's got a great purchase. It's also long. It's longer than most B&T guns. It has a vertical grip integrated, or else at least you can get one, and it has a safety. It also has a rotating locking bolt. It is more accurate, and it's just cool. That shuts up all the people talking about straight blowback. It's a closed bolt that rotates and locks. It's not the same as a Glock. And that brings us to the cons. The controls aren't perfect. There's no left side bolt release. The bolt release on the right is kind of far, and I need to break my grip slightly to operate it. Along with the safety, the charging handle is small and it can pinch your fingers. The integrated irons kind of block up some usable rail space, but if you don't want to use a optic, then they are there. It takes proprietary suppressors, which really pisses a lot of people off, but I don't mind. And that's about it, in my opinion. Okay, now let's get to the USW G17 chassis. The USW G17 chassis is made from aerospace-grade aluminum. It's designed to turn a Glock handgun into a carbine-like setup with a stock. The install was pretty simple in this. Unfortunately, I've never been able to get it out since I put it into this chassis. The screw, even when it's completely out, spring is so strong, I feel like I'm going to break my frame in half, and seeing how I'm Canadian and I can't replace the frame due to recent laws, I'm afraid to take it out and damage it. The The USW chassis has an integrated acro rail, and it also comes with a pick rail to go in that place. It will basically run any optic, lower 1/3 height or down. Kind of looks goofy with like a T1 or a bigger optic. I prefer it with a pistol optic. The length of pull is really short. Your face is practically on the back of the chassis, and the stock release is easily actuated with your index finger on your grip hand. The stock springs out via a little spring-loaded mechanism resembling a rivet. It can actually be opened and clicked into place using the momentum of a flick of the wrist. Flick of the wrist. In my experience, the action can get stuck if the retention screw up front isn't properly torqued down, and for me that doesn't mean it has to be tight. It means finger tight. If you have it too tight, the action will actually bind up. I'm not sure if it's the charge handle or not. And by the way, while I'm on the charge handle does scratch up the receiver of this chassis. And I'm really not slighting B&T for any of this. If you see the tolerances that we're dealing with between the slide and the side of the chassis, this is paper thin tolerances. The bolt release is really hard to use. A lot of that's due to the fact that it's too close to the edge of the chassis, and you really just have to give her hell to actually release the bolt with this. You got to totally change your grip. It's just not a good look. And you know, I mentioned how easy it was to get this thing into the chassis. Well, the takedown is an atrocious setup. The absolute worst. I need 2 toothpicks to leverage the takedown levers forward, all while finagling the whole chassis just right in order to catch the slide, press the trigger. All I need is another pair of hands. And that is just to get the slide out of the frame. The frame is still stuck in the chassis. I gotta call a spade a spade. Okay, let's just get to the pros of the USW G17. First is the non-reciprocating stationary optic. The fact that that doesn't reciprocate around is probably better to shoot, and it's going to be easier on your optic. The next best thing is that it actually has like a charge handle. It's in the back as well, and it works, and it does its job. It also has a bigger stock. The stock is quite a bit bigger on the USW G17 compared to the P320 version. Glock mags are readily available, and they're very cheap, and the Glock is probably the most modifiable handgun on planet Earth. And I also forgot to mention that this chassis also takes more grip options than the P320 version. Okay, and now for the cons. There's a couple Glock related things to start it off. The Glock mag angle, it's not steep enough for my personal preference, and I don't like the texture on the Glock's polymer. And then onto the chassis itself, the biggest cons are the takedown. It has no rails, it has a short stock, it has no safety, it has bad controls. Did I leave anything out? Truthfully, since I got the TP9, I haven't even had any urge whatsoever to even shoot this G17 USW again. I even sold the optic that was sighted in on it and bought something else for a gun I like more. A lot of it stems from the takedown, and ironically, I already hate shooting the Glock 19X anyway. Which brings me to our final competitor, the P320 USW for the Sig Sauer P320. As I sit here sulking about the USW A1 I missed for $2,000 for the $700 Chris Sphinxes, at least I can rest assured that I have the P320 USW. Whether you want to engage close range threats or shoot head-sized steel plates at 100 yards, this is your gun. Technically, the P320 USW is just a standard grip module like any other grip module, but it has a stock attached, and it's made by B&T, and it's awesome. Prior to getting the P320 USW grip, I was running a Wilson Combat and a Sig Sauer X grip. I gotta say, those grips have nothing on this USW grip. It's like my Cinderella grip, and it has a stock, and you can plink 110 yard 4-inch plates. Is the P320 USW a chassis alternative or a carbine alternative? No, it isn't. It's literally a pistol with a stock, and it doesn't have any rails. One of the big downfalls is that it has a reciprocating optic. This optic is also exposed on the back of the slide, and it is close to your face, even closer than the G17, and it's going to be hard on the optics because it's slapping around on that slide. And unlike the USW G17, you could take this USW to the range, you could shoot a pistol, and then you could swap this over and shoot this, then you could swap it back. Takes like 30 seconds each time. It is easy, the way it's meant to be. Let's just run through the pros of the USW P320. It is ultra small. It has ambi controls almost, and they're really easy to operate. It has crazy aftermarket options. It can be suppressor ready with just a barrel. Takedown, it is easy. It can be taken down in 30 seconds, no tools. Maybe you need like a popsicle stick or something to pry out the fire control unit. You do not need a second set of hands or your girlfriend to help you take it down. Okay, now let's get on to the cons. It has no rails, it has no safety, it has less grip options because it's really small up front and the grip options will snag on the mechanism to hold the stock. The reciprocating optic, the minuscule stock butt pad, and the length of pull, they're all really, really small. Those are basically the cons that I can think of on the USW P320. Okay, now we're going to go on to the judging section. The TP9 gets a 7 for controls. It loses 1 point for a non-ambi mag release, 1 for the bolt release, and 1 because of the charge handle being really small. Next is ergo. TP9 gets a 9. I love it. The grip angle is steep. The front vertical grip is super comfortable with a flat side for indexing the gun. The stock folds up perfectly and aligns with the grip, and it's super comfortable with the long length of pull. For footprint, the TP9 is going to get a 10. This was the smallest gun in the subgun challenge. That's the biggest gun in the USW challenge, so I'm going to have to add points to the other competitors. Next up is weight. The TP9 gets a 10 for weight. It's a light gun, which brings us to build quality. I'm going to give the TP9 a 9 for build quality. The feed ramp on my Gen 2 has a little nick in it. It's a 9. Next up is aftermarket, which is going to get a 6 today. It was a 5 up until yesterday, but B&T unveiled the TP9 Pro at SHOT Show yesterday, so it's going to be a 6. And although I was pretty underwhelmed by the majority of the changes, I will admit it's kind of growing on me. It does look pretty good. I like the original one more, but I fear change. Let me know in the comments what you think. Do you like the dual side charge handles, or do you miss the rear charge handle? So now we're on to triggers. The TP9 gets a 5 for trigger. It's heavy, sloppy, springy, and it breaks clean. If the gun ban gets overturned here in Canada, I'm going to need 2 of those titanium triggers ASAP, B&T, and some of those blast effectors while you're at it. Speaking of cool factor, it's an 8. Epic movie gun lineage, can't beat it. For accuracy, I'm going to give the TP9 an 8. I can hit 100-yard plates, but it's more fun at 25 yards, let's put it that way. And last but not least, we have takedown. The TP9 is easy to take down. It's going to get a 7. It's toolless. Pretty much, you can always have it apart in about 30 seconds or less. It's easy. That brings the grand total of the TP9 to 78. And now let's get to the G17 USW. For controls, I gave it a 5. The bolt release is extremely hard to use, almost impossible. It has nothing other than the Glock magazine release, and then it does have a charge handle, which is good, but that doesn't make up for the bad everything else. It gets a 5 for ergos. Everything is basically Glock related, but the Glock is literally the foundation of the ergonomics, so it's a 5. Footprint is going to be an 11. It's pretty small. It's even smaller than TP9. I actually had to toss in a point. For weight, the USW G17 is going to get a 10. It's really light, basically the same weight as the TP9. For build quality, it's going to get a 9. It's beautiful, just like any B&T firearm. The reason it's going to get a 9 is because the charge handle scratches the chassis and because I can't get the frame out of it. Next up is going to be aftermarket. I'm going to give it an 8 because the Glock is probably the most customizable handgun in the whole world. Aside from the fact that you can't do anything with the frames because it only takes a G5 frame, it's got everything else aftermarket going for it. And that brings us to the trigger. The G17 trigger on its own is a 5 for me. I'm going to judge according to my experience, and I'm well aware that you can upgrade the Glock trigger, but seeing how I can't even get the frame out of this chassis, I'm sure I could install a trigger inside the chassis, but I'm still going to give it a 5. It's springy, it's mushy, it's shitty. And that brings us to cool factor. And I'm not going to do what you think I'm going to do, which is just shit all over Glock's platform. No, I actually understand this is a pretty cool looking gun. It's going to be in futuristic movies in the future. Next up is accuracy. I'm going to give the G17 a 6 for accuracy. It gets a 6. Maybe because I need more trigger time behind it. I wasn't super impressed with the accuracy. Better than without the stock, but it's not like a sub gun. Possibly that's due to the lightweight. Last but also least is takedown, which is absolutely atrocious, and it's going to get a 2. I would rather sort toothpicks by wood hue than have to take down the G17 USW. I'm completely ignoring the fact that mine is also stuck in the chassis. I know I've mentioned that a bunch already, but my Glock frame is stuck in my G17 USW chassis and I can't get it out. Plus, you'll need a second set of hands and tools just to get the slide off of the frame. That brings the grand total for the USW G17 to a whopping 62, which brings us to our last competitor, the P320 USW. For controls, the P320 USW gets a 6. All the P320 controls are completely usable, the same as they would be on any other grip module, and they're easy to operate, which brings us to ergos, which is a 6. I love the grip angle, I love the grip texture, I love the skinniness of the grip, I love the size of the grip and how it's slightly square and it indexes perfectly. Now that brings us to footprint, which is a 13. It's so tiny I had to give it 3 extra points on the TP9, literally pocket-sized. Next up we have weight, which is going to be an 11. The P320 weighs literally nothing. The module is ounces. You're basically holding the slide, the barrel, the fire control unit. On to build quality, that's going to be a 9. The P320 USW is the same polymer you'll find on a TP9. It gets very dirty. You can kind of see some dirt getting ingrained into the polymer, but the fit and finish is amazing. The latch is top notch, which brings us to aftermarket. The USW P320 is going to get high marks in this category. It's going to be a 10. You can literally put any slide, barrel, trigger available for the P320 into this module. You want to run a P320 Spectre comp? Go right ahead. And now we have trigger. Trigger is going to get an 8. The stock trigger that I have is the flat SIG trigger. That's the medium pull weight trigger. This is a really nice trigger compared to a G17 or even a TP9 trigger. A joy to shoot. Next up is cool factor, which is going to be a 7. Although it's not as cool as a TP9, it's much more usable and practical than the G17 USW, which feels oddly gimmicky in comparison. Which brings us to accuracy, which is going to be an 8. The P320 USW is super accurate. With the Holosun SCS 320 Romeo 1 Pro or the 507C that I've tried, I was blinking 4-inch steel plates at 100 yards with boring repetition. So fun. And last but definitely not least is takedown. It's a 10 all day long. The P320 can swap grip modules in a matter of seconds. It's for the most part toolless aside from the FCU sometimes needing a slight pry out of the module, which in my experience is the same with all modules from every manufacturer. That brings the grand total of the P320 USW to a respectable 88 points. In conclusion, I say get whichever one makes you feel the best and fits your use case the most. You're not going to go wrong. They're all pretty awesome. Don't get me wrong. It might sound like I hate the USW G17. It just isn't as good as the TP9. If you're trying to get that to scratch the itch, you're going to actually have to get both. It's eventually going to happen. You're just wasting your money. So plan on getting both. Okay, everybody. Thanks for watching. I just want to shout out my 102 subscribers. It happened really fast. Hopefully we're going to hit 1,000 this year. Stay tuned for more B&T content. Peace.